Hi, we're Oxygen Conservation, and this is the Shoe Room Sessions. Good climate week so far?
Yeah, it's been great.
Where do you live in New York?
I live in Dobbs Ferry, so I'm
Okay,
close by. It's up the Metro North, which is kind of the commuter train. So,
nice. What's been the best event? And then I'm going to ask you what your favorite one was. So there'll be two different maybe answers.
oh, well, the event that I just came from on dynamic baselines for me was the best event because it was very technical, in the weeds. Coming from a science background, I really like it when we get deep into stuff. So I feel like there was a lot of substance there. My favorite was last night. I went to an event on a boat. That was very fun, just sailing
Why
around the
have we not
harbor.
been on a boat? Okay. Okay, fine. Apparently that clashed with an event we were at with Tony Blair, the former UK Prime Minister, and Arnold Schwarzenegger yesterday.
Okay, well, I guess that takes precedence.
Love it. It's probably a good idea if we tell people who you are and what you do.
Yes. So my name is Anika Staccone. I am the product owner at Earthshot Labs. And so I work on our platform, our geospatial platform, LandOS, and also on Biome, our forest inventory app, where we use iPhone-based LiDAR to measure DBH and height for trees. My background is in science, so I spent many years at Earthshot working on science models for the greenhouse gas quantification for carbon projects. Yeah,
Super exciting. What do I need to understand about you to know why you do what you do?
yeah. So I can give you a little bit of background of my story. I grew up in Colorado, spent a lot of time in the mountains, and have always felt this call to come back to trees and really understanding forests. That's something I've realized. I have tried several other things in over, my life, and I just keep coming back to forests. I think that's something that's just underlying super interesting and exciting to me. And I find myself thinking about it when I'm at the park or when I'm on a walk. And when you find one of those true passions, I think it just is like a runaway train because you're thinking about it all the time. That helps you realize more things. The more you know about something, the more interesting it becomes. So, my first kind of experience studying forests from a more research perspective was in high school. The mountain pine beetle epidemic came through Colorado, and that was a time when just huge swaths of forest died off. So, they're super homogeneous forests. And so, this pest came through, and there was a huge die off. And that was super shocking, but really interesting to look a bit deeper into the patterns. Where did the trees die off? Where did they actually survive? We saw this elevation pattern and hill aspect pattern. And so it was really interesting to get deeper into it. That was my first foray into testing. This beetle lives in a symbiotic relationship with the Ophiostoma fungus. And that fungus is actually what kills the tree because it clogs up sort of all the transport within the tree. And looking at different ways, can you use different oils to actually get rid of that fungal infection within the tree? Looking at pheromones, can you use pheromones to move these beetles away from certain trees and protect them? So that was my first experience, like really researching forests, and I think that set me off on the path of forest research and forest conservation.
For those of you just listening to this, Annika's hands became so animated when you were talking about trees and you just came to life. It was magical. So somehow we get from that first passion for studying trees to a career starting in data science. How do we make that leap?
Yeah, so I think once you get into a quantitative field, then you quickly realize how important like large data volumes are, and that naturally leads into statistics and data science, and really getting at problems both from this experiential in the field lens, but also then from the data lens. So I got super excited about data and working with large data sets. I went to do a PhD at Columbia working with large data sets to understand the effect of nitrogen fixing trees and how much nitrogen gets input into ecosystems through these trees. And that was my first exposure to Bayesian statistics and working with really large data sets. That sparked a passion for me on data science and really applying that data and statistical methods to understanding forests.
And when was that year-wise time period? Did you do that?
That was 2016 to 2021.
Okay. So perfect timing in that I think certainly in the UK, the environment sector was waking up to the fact that we'd collected data for a long time, but it wasn't being applied to anything. People weren't finding out actual ways you can predict and improve the environment as a result. Were similar things happening in the US?
For sure. So in the US, efforts like NEON, the National Ecological Observing Network, were coming to life where there's standard protocols, a lot more data types being collected, hyperspectral data starting to come into the picture. So yeah, also a super exciting time. And I think also just a time of a lot of environmental awareness, like you're saying.
And you spoke at the start about moving from a principal data science role to being the product owner for LandOS. So two questions there. Talk to us about what LandOS is, please, and then explain what the role of a product owner is.
Okay, yeah. So LandOS is our geospatial platform. It's designed really for projects looking for carbon finance to understand whether carbon finance might be possible for them. And so we take this lens of starting with a very broad analysis where it's polygon specific, but we're using some standard assumptions about what discounts might be, and then slowly working to customize those discounts for specific projects and help them do the quantification for this. I guess we could back up even a little further. So this is all situated within the voluntary carbon market. And so the voluntary carbon market is an opportunity really for finance to go into conservation and restoration projects. And so by either conserving or growing up carbon on your landscape, then you can generate carbon credits and you can sell those credits. And it sounds straightforward, but there's a sort of complex accounting that goes along with it. And so important for projects to understand before they start how that accounting will play out for their project so that you can forecast and understand how many credits you might generate from that project. And that feeds back into the design of a project. So based on the revenue that you can expect to generate in a project, that's going to affect the design of what kind of implementation you can do. So our platform is really around that, helping projects to understand how that carbon accounting is going to play out for them, and then be able to think about what is the design that makes sense for using carbon finance in that context.
And is it purely, when you talk about carbon, you're purely talking about tree-based carbon at this stage?
So yeah, we primarily work with tree-based carbon, reforestation, forest conservation, and improved forest
And in
management.
terms of your geographical coverage, what countries do you span in terms of your data set?
Yeah, so we work globally.
That's
So
impressive.
a big effort has gone into collecting and synthesizing data from across the world. We have better data coverage in some places than others. And so when we work with a project in a new place, that the forefront of our effort is gathering additional data for that area and really getting an understanding of what data is out there, and what gaps still remain.
How heavily were you involved in the build phase of LandOS? Was that your principal work before the role you're doing now?
Yeah, so LandOS was really born out of our own internal processes. So previous to this, I was working on the quantification of greenhouse gas for different projects. And over that time, we built up tools that were useful to us internally. And so we realized, oh, when we work with a really early stage project, they often need this set of analyses. And we built up code over time to say, okay, now we have this in a Jupyter notebook. And the science team can take that and run it anytime, there's a new project. That eventually got codified into a piece of software that we used internally. And so then you didn't have to go looking for the most recent version of the Jupyter notebook or, oh, this package isn't playing nicely with another Python package. And it was all wrapped up in this great software package. And over time, we realized that that's super valuable for us internally. There's probably value externally as well. And so we've gone into this experimental phase, turning that platform outside and seeing how are people using it outside of the company to understand their land base and how can we better tailor this, so that it can be used by external users.
And was that a scary step to make? Because it's another child, right? It's something that's really precious that you've all built and developed. Was it scary opening that up to the real world?
I think it's super exciting. We're really jazzed to have users outside who bring in other perspectives, other data sets that they want to see, and other ways for us to think about these same problems. I would say the main scary part is we had already proved there was a lot of value to this software internally. And so how can we continue to support the team, the internal team who was already getting value from this, while also tailoring it as an external platform? From a software perspective, there are different priorities if it's an internal product versus external. So there have definitely been trade-offs there, but mostly we're super excited to have other users and get other feedback.
That's brilliant. In terms of the build, without going into specifics, because you'll have proprietary stuff that works for you guys, but is it the same infrastructure and build, and effectively you're applying a different set of underlying geographical data through that same interface?
Yep, exactly. So the carbon methodologies lay out the framework for how these calculations should take place. And then we customize that with the data that's relevant to a specific project.
And so, with us in the UK being covered by the Woodland Carbon Code, and I mean, the peatland one's irrelevant, would you have the ability to work against the Woodland Carbon Code, or it'd be more of the sort of general, the Vera and gold standard style approaches that are more globally?
So we have the intention to expand beyond the standard global methodologies that we've been using. The sort of first principles of what we've built would be applicable there. It's just fine tuning the details. For instance, we've worked a lot with land eligibility, and so understanding whether there has been deforestation on the land in the last 10 years. And so that's really to prevent perverse incentives where people are cutting down their forest in order to reforest. And so some things like that, there's some customization and slight nuance and differences between the rules of these different quantification schemes. So we would have the same underlying technology and underlying framework. For instance, we've developed a tool that we call Forest Loop for doing our own land use land cover analysis to get locally accurate LULC. Um, and so we could apply that to another framework just by saying, okay, maybe there's not a 10-year deforestation rule, maybe it goes back further or whatever.
What level of granularity do you run at in terms of underlying cell size?
So that's going to depend on the underlying data that we're using. In general, we're around 30 meters for a lot of our data sets, but that's variable.
And if you, that's just incredible to think where we were 5 or 10 years ago in terms of the ability to do this to where we are now. Um, I fully appreciate for the audience out there, this is going to be a super data geeky podcast, and I'm all about it. I'm here for this. It's so good. When I last spoke to Troy, who you work with, he was sharing his frustrations with how in other sectors and other industries, he thinks the pace of change in the environment sector is slow. When you look at it through a data lens, does it feel like things are changing quickly or slowly for you?
Oh, that's such an interesting question. Um, I think the thing that's changing fast is globally available data. So there have been very robust, good data sets in some parts of the world for a long time. But now, especially with satellite data, with more activity and data sharing, global the data that's global extent is increasing quickly.
So you've, by the sounds of it, you'll be in a very unique position that you've seen and understood the specifics of different geographies, legislations, and how they look and think about carbon. Are there some features of different geographies or codes that you particularly like that you think should be borrowed and applied in other places?
Other places, you mean beyond the voluntary carbon
Oh, I
market?
meant geographically, so things that might exist in one place that could be applied in another, but beyond the carbon market's an interesting one as well. So you mentioned about the risk of deforestation and how land that had previously been deforested in the last 10 years couldn't be used. One of my frustrations with the Woodland Carbon Code in the UK, and
Yeah.
I don't know if it exists in other geographies, is we have got 130 acres of Atlantic rainforest in the UK, which is we own that, and it's like one of the most precious habitat. And I've got some photos I can show you afterwards. According to the Woodland Carbon Code, that is worthless from a carbon perspective because it's already woodland and it's not additional. And I think it's such a perverse incentive there that actually a landowner would be better to cut it down. Whereas all our calculations on carbon stocks assume that we don't lose what's already there. It's a bit like in the financial world, a Swiss bank having a safety deposit box and us saying, well, as soon as you've put it away in the bank, it doesn't exist anymore. So that's one of my challenges with it, I think.
Yeah, okay, that's super interesting and not my specific area of expertise. But Yeah, I completely agree with that. The sort of additionality argument that it's not additional. And we encounter this also sometimes in the tropics as well with communities that have cared really well for their forests and for their land. And so there's little deforestation risk. And so it's like, oh, you're being penalized for having really taken care of your
Completely.
forests.
Yeah, it feels
Yeah.
totally unfair from. There's a general narrative across the voluntary carbon market, I think, that we want a just and fair transition for people. But that
Yes.
feels like one of the biggest barriers, that if you have done the right thing for the environment, you don't have. And we see it in the UK with farmers who maybe have gone organic already with their land, they've managed things in appropriate ways, they've protected their hedgerows, they've kept water in the landscape. They're told, well, it's not in a bad state, so you can't get any benefit from improving it. It's a challenge.
Yeah. Oh, completely. And I think I can see the arguments on both sides, right? From an additionality perspective, it's like you found a way to take care of to take care of this land without carbon finance. And so from a carbon finance perspective, it's not additional. But on the flip side, if carbon finance is for I guess it comes down to what is the point of this work? Is it about CO2? Is it about the carbon in the atmosphere? In which case, the additionality matters a lot because if you're just looking at like the net change of CO2 in the atmosphere, then it matters whether there was the intention to cut it down or not. But if you're just looking at do we value and protect nature, then past protection doesn't necessarily have any bearing on the value going forward.
So I think that beautifully illustrates. So we did the market leading study on, and this is just UK based. What I'm about to describe, all forms of voluntary carbon credit transaction in the UK. So earlier this year, we were really fortunate to break the record for the highest price paid for a PIU. So we sold at £125 a tonne. So we set the ceiling on what a premium credit was. But the reason we were able to do that is what the customer was buying wasn't just the sequestration. They were buying the integrity, the quality, the transparency, literally the ability to go visit, interact, see that estate. They get a set of digital photography and imagery and story associated with it. Whereas another buyer might be buying, they just want a ton of carbon put
Yep.
away. So we're starting now to see that stratification of the market, which I
Hmm.
think is absolutely vital. Are you seeing similar in the US yet?
Yeah. So I think across the world and within the US, you're
Oh,
definitely
interesting.
seeing that divergence in good quality, like you're saying. Quality credits are definitely selling for more. And I just came from an event on dynamic baselines, which is part of high quality credits, and many people observing projects with dynamic baselines were selling for much higher.
It's interesting, isn't it? They're often described as additional benefits, whereas actually our view is they should be fundamental to a carbon credit that is a premium one. Um, in terms of the platform you've built, is there views that you might extend it to look at things like soil carbon and maybe even nature credits in future years?
Oh yeah, the super long-term vision would be to be able to incorporate all of this and give a really holistic view of the land, both to understand what's there, incorporate monitoring data, be able to track that over time. For now, we're focusing more narrowly on carbon and biodiversity as it's viewed as a co-benefit for carbon projects, but we would love to incorporate more of those things. And Earthshot's history, we come from a very scientifically rigorous approach to things, we have had the aspiration to quantify, oh, what are the water benefits that a project is bringing somewhere, things like this. It hasn't been the focus just because that's not what, like you're saying, you have to build a business. That's not what's been a business need and, therefore a priority, but we would love to build that out in land OS.
It's another one of those complete contradictions and compromises. You want to empower and inspire bright people to explore the things they're interested in because that's where the magic happens.
Yeah.
But equally, you need to be commercially viable as well to make the whole thing work. So it's one of the most exciting, challenging parts of the sector at the moment. And I always talk about feeling really privileged because some of the events around the city this week have focused on renewable energy, and we've spoken to some people at those. That's quite a hard industry at the moment because they're 20, 30 years in, and all the exciting discovery bits we're talking about, they were 20 years ago for this industry. Now it's all standardized and it's really difficult to experiment and innovate. Whereas I think now we're living that most exciting, innovative chapter of natural capital. Does it feel similar for you?
Oh, definitely. And I think all sides of the equation. There are people who are super passionate and thinking really hard. You see buyers who have, interesting ideas about how they want to see projects done. You see investors with ideas, project developers, technical assistants. Yeah, so there's a lot of innovation and trying to find common ground and consensus.
I don't know if you've started to have some of these conversations yet and whether it would come across your desk, but this week I've had conversations with sort of investment bankers and lawyers about the idea of securitizing future carbon revenues and how we can take the data work that you're doing and we're doing and the changes on the ground and integrate them with sophisticated financial engineering. And 12 months ago, that wouldn't have been a possible conversation. So that's super exciting because the permutations, the alternative scenarios that can come from that just have the potential to unlock so much more capital into the sector.
Yep, exactly. And taking that uncertainty off of nature investments, yeah, would make a big difference.
Um, is AI impacting your work, and do you think it will in future?
AI is certainly impacting the work. I think for all of this nature based and ecology based work, there is still a need to get the ground truth and the field data really organized
Is this just
and
because you want to go hang out in
holistic.
forests and really like trees?
No, no, the ground truth is super important, and the models are only as good as the data that's feeding them. And so we have great coverage from satellite data, and that's definitely taking off. But you need the field data to go with that, and that is lagging behind in this AI revolution. And so there's still a need for synthesizing, harmonizing the ground data that's out there, further ground data campaigns. And I think to some extent in this AI race, it's getting forgotten just how important that data is.
You're absolutely right. There's no substitute for feet on the ground and understanding the approach that's happening there and what the environment's doing and the wildlife and the species composition. What we're seeing in the UK is we aren't getting enough ecologists and specialists through academia into the sector. So there's a real
Mm.
absence of that skill set. Are you able to get the people on the ground and the skill sets you need to calibrate the models and to inform the projects?
Yeah, so I would say that's a complicated question, especially because we work globally. Something that's really important is to have local experts. So people who know those forests, know those ecosystems, the species that are there, the dynamics there. And so that's something that we work really hard to do as much as possible is to connect with local experts who know these environments.
So do you tend to have a specific lead on the ground that you would work with and they would help identify the
Usually
experts?
that's how it works. So there's a project developer on the ground, and then they'll have relationships within the scientific community or even within their team who are scientists who know these environments. So that's really important. We also at Earthshot have our own scientists visit the sites as well. So we're getting inputs from lots of different
It
perspectives.
must be really competitive for the scientists who want to go visit the coolest places.
Yeah, everyone is always eager to go on site visits, but field work is not always easy. So I think there's the excitement and the joy of seeing a project in a new ecosystem. There's also the struggle of, you know,
The
uh,
logistics and the
bugs and
reality of
mud and
travel.
humidity. Exactly.
Completely. Have you got examples within the business where technology and progress that way has unlocked something that otherwise would have been difficult or impossible before?
Yeah, I guess everything that we do is really grounded in technology. So, something that we've worked a lot with is building up our database of ground observations for growth rates of different forests. And without the underlying sort of technology and machine learning modeling that we've been doing there, it wouldn't be possible to generate sort of the accurate growth curves
And
that we
they're
do.
data sets you've had to create inside the business rather than being able to borrow them from other places.
Yeah, so it's a combination. We've curated this manually from field data, from literature data that's out there, from project partners.
Is there one or two data sets that consistently frustrates you that you don't have, that you just wish you could reach for and plug in that's not there yet?
Oh gosh, I mean, baseline biodiversity data is something that's often missing for us. Projects really want to quantify biodiversity benefits, but we're often lacking that baseline data for that. Um, of course, the growth rate data, that's something that I've worked with a lot personally. What we have has come together over the course of many years, and that that global harmonized data set of ground observations is something that, we have long wished for. Any kind of field data, though, ground truth observations for land use, land cover modeling, all super useful.
Do you also cross over because you've got such a geographical remit, an unlimited geographical remit? Um, Earth appreciated, not beyond that. Do you look at land ownership and underlying like rules and regulations about land as well? Because even in the UK, that's incredibly difficult to identify sometimes.
Yeah. So yeah, that is a critical part of any carbon project is understanding the land tenure and also the carbon rates that go with that land. That's not my area of expertise, but we have people on the team who really specialize in that. And also the policy side, right? Is the policy environment right for voluntary carbon credits? So that's something we were really hard on. We haven't been able to integrate that into the platform as much as we'd like. We would love to have a land tenure layer, but that data doesn't exist. You're saying even in the UK, it's
Yeah.
challenging. And then in many other contexts, the data simply just, they aren't even there to find. And so that's a whole process and oftentimes very manual to go through and understand really deeply what is the land ownership, what are the carbon rights ownership, and what is the right structure for a project.
A lot of the conversations we've had this week have ultimately come back to the super scalers and the big data centers that are coming, both in terms of the potential they can give to our data work and the speed at which we can do computations, but also the massive energy demand they have and where they're sited. How do you think about that contradiction?
Yeah, that's a really challenging one. Like you're saying, there are so many contradictions in this world. For us, as much as possible, we're trying to, reduce the intensive computations that we're doing. But for some of these, it's just essential to use some of that computing power to get the answers that we need, to get the rigor in the models, and ultimately be able to channel carbon finance into these projects.
Are there when you think about the future, is there a particular time domain? So some people like to be asked, what will things look like in a year or 2 years or 5 years? Does your brain naturally go to a time domain when you think forward into the future?
I would say no. We're constantly evolving and iterating, and the carbon space has changed so much. I think we're constantly in a path of evolution. We have a vision for where we're going, and then that vision is always updating. So, yeah.
We were at an event the other day and someone was asked, what would change about BNG? Are you familiar with BNG, Biodiversity Net Gain?
No,
It's it's a UK based nature credit system that requires any form of developer. If you damage an acre of a type of habitat,
yeah,
you have to
okay.
create
Mhm.
another or offset it with an equivalent, and it's very habitat specific,
Uh-huh.
and it's not a very accessible metric to someone who isn't an ecologist and a data professional. Very complicated at this stage, but has done some wonderful things. Is starting to take off. On this panel, they were asked about how they thought this would change over the next 5 years. And I kind of, in my head, I was like, that's just a terrible question, because if you'd have asked me how I mean, we're 4 years old as a business. Like, how old's Earthshot as a business?
It's about 4 years as well.
Similar timeline. And if you'd have asked us where we were 5 years ago to get to, I wouldn't have even imagined it. So
Yep.
that's why I wonder about the time domain. But if you were going to be really bold and really ambitious and really optimistic, where do you hope the sector and carbon and data in your world is in 10 years?
Oh, 10 years. Well, I hope in 10 years it's really taken off and carbon projects
How
are.
many years did you think I was going to say? Did you think I was going to say five?
I thought you were going for 5.
Okay, you can
Yeah.
choose five if you prefer. It's entirely.
Well, 5. I hope there's been, really substantive change as well. But in 10 years, I hope that there's these data problems have been worked out, and so project developers can really focus on the ground operations and the things that are their areas of expertise, and not be trying to go through the quantification and understanding the complex nuances of methodologies. A vision that we have at Earthshot is to make carbon markets more accessible as well, so that you don't need this huge project and a big land base to get started, that it's much more accessible to anybody who has 1 acre of land and they want to conserve it, they want to reforest it. So I would say that would be the vision in 10 years, that this is just fully adopted. There's much less friction in the process of buying and selling credits. There's less variability in quality. And so it doesn't require buyers to have this huge, sophisticated team who can assess and evaluate whether a credit is high quality or not.
So interesting. So I spoke to one US high street bank, and they're about to roll out an app that allows you, and this is in the next 12 months. It will allow you, when you go purchase your coffee, it will say, you've purchased this coffee from this place. Would you like to offset this
Ah, that's
purchase?
amazing.
And they're creating a registry, and they will sell you a disaggregated credit across more than 1,000 projects. So that infrastructure is set up perfectly for what you described, because as a small landowner, you could sell in 5 credits, for
Yep.
example,
Hmm.
but those 5 credits might be split across 50,000 transactions in individual bits and pieces. And so it shows the potential that literally could make carbon markets democratized and accessible to everyone.
Exactly, exactly. And so taking out the bespoke nature that we have right now and just making this a mainstream enterprise that people can participate in.
I think people would assume, because our product is like the market leading premium product of what's been offered,
Yes.
I think people would assume I wouldn't want to see that democratization, because that standardizes, right? But I think that's necessary for society, for wildlife, for climate, for nature, for everything. We need to hit that level of globalization and standardization. And I don't think it takes away from the premium products, because you look at any other market, you can walk down any street in New York, and you can go to so many chain fast food restaurants, or
Hmm.
you can still go to a Michelin star incredible restaurant of something that's precious and unique and reassuringly expensive. I think all markets offer that disaggregation and differentiation. So I think we just haven't got there yet with carbon markets, and it will
Yep.
come in the future.
Yep. Exactly. And I think with that will come maybe an ease of understanding that disaggregation and quality. When you go to a restaurant, you can evaluate very quickly whether you're at McDonald's or a Michelin starred restaurant, and it doesn't require this big expertise. And I think as carbon markets evolve as well, the characteristics that make a really high quality credit will become more apparent, and it will be easier for buyers to distinguish.
Super exciting. You've been incredibly generous with your time, and I've loved the opportunity to dive into stuff data so much. I like to end all podcasts with the same question. What's the one thing I haven't asked you wish I had?
We almost got into this a little bit, the conservation versus restoration approach. And I think something that's interesting to think about is how restoration projects turn into conservation projects over time. Right. Once the forest has been established, then we hope that it remains and that it's permanent on the landscape. And so the way for these different approaches to work together is super important. So like it's very interesting to hear you talking about more pristine forest that you already have, and how we can value that alongside the value of restoration.
And how do you think about the role data and tech will play in that transition from restoration to conservation and permanency, hopefully?
Yeah, I think that that's something that has a much more human dimension to it, right? It's about designing projects that really work for people, and that work on the landscape. And so there is sort of the incentive to maintain those forests even after the crediting period or after that initial growth has been achieved.
It's why the ecotourism part of what we do. So we have about 2,000 visitors a year that come and stay in glamping. Well, you saw Ash's podcast, or listened to Ash's podcast. You should watch the video version of that,
Okay.
because it's literally shot in this glamping tent looking out on the lake on her estate.
Oh,
It's stunning.
amazing.
I'll show you some pictures before you go. And it has a disproportionate emotional and positive impact on our work to the revenues it generates. So the ecotourism side of what we do is profitable and separately is a
Hmm.
really cool business. However, it's the thing that people want to talk about all the time. It's the things people want to engage with, and it gives them a gateway to initially imagine themselves in a landscape, but then be part of it. And if you can inspire people that way, they become the custodians and the protectors. And that's how we go from restoration to conservation to forever.
Exactly, and that's so important, and I think that's part of this data conversation as well, is that the field data is important, and also the people who still know bird calls, who can still identify trees. Like there is an innate value in that connection to the landscape.
Amazing. Anika, thank you so much for coming in and visiting with us. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thanks for having me.
Bye, guys.